Globalization is kind of weird. It's a very new concept, historically speaking. It used to be that the cost of transport was usually 90 to 99% of the cost of any sort of good or product. Now we're well below 1%. That didn't just accidentally happen. It required a significant change of condition. Now, there are a number of reasons why that 99% number has held for most of human history, but mostly it was about security. Just think about the things that we move today. Think if you had one bad actor, whether it was a foreign government or a pirate or whatever it happened to be, all they have to do is interrupt one step of one supply chain one time, and that's enough to break the entire system down. And that was the norm for history. So in order to change our condition so that wasn't the case, we needed to remove every single naval power from the board, and we had to make sure that there was no alternative economic model that would compete with it. And that took the massive destruction of World War II. And at the end of the war, the Americans decided it wasn't globalization that they needed, it was that they needed an alliance of cannon fodder. We needed people who were willing to stand up to a nuclear-armed Red Army at the height of its power and form a line to protect the free world, and no one was going to do that for free. So we created the globalization model where we used our Navy, the only one aside from the Brits to survive the war, to patrol the global ocean so that anyone could interface with anyone else at any time and access our market. And that created the basis for what we now recognize as trade. And we've been playing on that for 75 years. The problem is that, number one, because for us it was always a bribe that was linked to our security, and we now define our security differently, have been for 5 presidents now, we've been backing away bit by bit. But I would actually argue that even if we got a different president tomorrow that broke with the last 5, it's like, no, globalization is what we want. It's what we want to keep. It's already too late, because part of what made globalization work is there was only one global navy, and that is not the environment we're in anymore. We have steadily, since the Cold War, retooled our naval forces to be very, very supercarrier heavy. Within the decade, we're going to have 14 supercarriers. And if you want to knock off a country, that's exactly what you want. But if you want to patrol the global oceans, you need like 800 destroyers, and we only have 70. So at current rates of naval build-out, we would not be able to provide the coverage we did during the Cold War this century. So we know that the security paradigm that has allowed multimodal shipping and multi-step manufacturing supply chains is already gone. We're just waiting for that one pirate to take the wrong ship. And then this all unwinds. Well, there's a whole lot of things going on in China. We can go into into that as you want. But the Chinese economic model is failing independent of what's going on with the American relationship, independent of what's going on with globalization. Their population is in free fall. They're now admitting that they overcounted their population by over 100 million people, and all of the missing millions are age 40 and under. So they know that this is their last decade as an economic power anyway. They also know that they're probably going to be the country that suffers the most from the Ukraine war, with obviously the exception of Ukraine, because they're at the end of all these supply lines, and it doesn't take much disruption anywhere in the system for them to be the ones left holding the whole bag. And then, of course, their hyper-financialization model, which is basically they print currency in order to put octane into any sort of economic activity so that the population is employed. It's not very efficient, but it gets growth. They've now taken that further and farther than any other country in history, and every other country in history who's ever tried this has eventually had a crash. So they're going to be wrestling with all these things in addition to a failing political system. And if we're moving into an environment where growth is no longer part of the Chinese story, and the only way that they can kind of hold the center and keep the CCP in charge is authoritarianism, then all of a sudden trade doesn't look nearly as exciting to them. And if you look at the folks that Xi appointed to be in his Politburo in the last couple of weeks, they're all yes men. None of them know much about economics or trade or manufacturing at all. All that's left of the leadership now is control. And if they crash the economy and if it collapses by 2/3 and they have a famine, but it allows the CCP to remain in charge, then from their point of view, that's probably worth it. I don't think they have their eyes on world powerdom anymore. They may have a lot of vessels, about 600 versus our 300. But about 90% of them would fit in this room. Not all at the same time, don't be dumb, but like one at a time. They're small, they have very limited range, they can't make it past the first island chain. So in any sort measuring contest where you're trying to evaluate how far they can really go, they can make it to central Vietnam. I'm sorry, the world power that is not. I'm going to be in the minority on this topic. I don't think a war is imminent or inevitable. In fact, I don't think it's going to happen at all. And if you look at the 3 of the 5 countries in the world that are most dependent on maritime transport for exports, China, Russia, Iran are on the list. And so they all have a vested interest from their point of view in disrupting their own neighborhoods. China in order to expand its field of reach, the Russians and the Iranians in order to get better prices for their energy exports, but they forget that beyond the horizon, if they do what they want within the horizon, then beyond the horizon, nothing about their system functions anymore. But more importantly, it's just the United States. We no longer identify global economic growth as part of our security paradigm, and we haven't since Herbert Walker Bush. The Chinese look at Taiwan in a number of similar ways to the way the Russians look at Ukraine, and so the Chinese have used a series of assumptions to prepare for the war. You don't just snap your fingers and, we're going to do it tomorrow. No, this decades of preparation. And they've always counted on the Russians to kind of be the canary in the coal mine. So assumption number 1, it's going to be an easy fight. You can walk from Moscow to Kiev, and the Ukrainians had only been preparing for this war for 8 years. You have to swim to Taipei, and the Taiwanese have been preparing for 45. Also, the U.S. is a naval power, and Taiwan's an island. Assumption 2, Russian weapons are pretty good, so let's steal all their IP and clone them for our entire military. They're now having a $2 trillion of buyer's remorse. Assumption number 3, Russia's way too important to the world, so no one is going to sanction them if the war happens. And say what you will about the Russian economy, it is wildly inefficient, but it is the world's largest producer and exporter of energy and food products. It's China is the world's largest importer of both. You take the sanctions that are on Moscow and you put them on Beijing, you get a deindustrialization collapse complete with a famine that kills 500 million people in less than 18 months. But I think the thing that has really terrified them the most is the boycotts. It's one thing when Brussels or Washington or Tokyo says that you can't do this, you can't do that. But when Halliburton emerges as the voice of morality, holy crap. The Chinese economic model is based on access to foreign markets and foreign technology. You remove that, there is nothing left. And so every assumption that they have made for 40 years has been proved wrong in the last 8 months. Now, normally, this is where the chairman would take all his smart people and put them in the back room with some beer and pizza and say, don't come out until I have a plan B. But as part of his purges, he has killed all those people. So there's no capacity left in the Chinese system to adapt to change or in circumstance or otherwise. And so the only reason I can see that Xi might give the order and attempt a war anyway, even almost certainly knowing he would lose and it would be the end of China as a strategic power, in a matter of days, because this is a naval fight,